just to give you a little quick background, so this talk actually comes from a research paper that I did for one of my doctorate classes last summer. So this came up as one of the different options for projects that we could do, and it was, I would say, it was kind of more hot front and center last year, before I went to classes, during classes, and when I got back from classes. And there was all this talk, and all these bishops were coming out with all these different ways of how do we respond as Catholics to all of this, especially just gender ideology. And there was really a lot of big pushes coming in different public schools, and what's this going to look like? What are trying to bring this in the Catholic schools? And there was just a lot of like, how do we address this, or how do we come at this? What direction? What angle? So as one of my classes, we spent a whole day on it, went into it, or maybe 2 days, pretty intense, with a lot of just background and research and coming from different perspectives. And then they gave an option for the paper. And actually for this paper, you could, if you chose this topic, you could write potential 4 homilies about transgenderism, gender ideology, and gender dysphoria. So I thought, I'm going to try that. And I wrote it down, got it all in 4 different homily formats, and I was ready. And then I was like, when could I ever give 4 homilies on this thing in a row, you know? And, so I tried to succinct it down to 2 homilies, and I thought, man, these are going to be really long homilies. It's not going to work. And so I said, well, let's just try with a talk. And so, of course, Peggy was happy to have another talk. So we're trying this tonight as a talk, and it's we made a little. You've kind of got the summary outline notes there from the handout, front and back. It's 4 sections, and just to kind of preface, there'll be some things that I will quote, but for the most part, I've left out quotes because that would, I think, really bog down the talk, you know. And but if you want any of the research, you want any books, you want to look any further, you want the bibliography, you can just send me an email, and I'm happy to send you all of that. There's a couple pages here of bibliography of things went through. I can even just recommend, if you are interested, a couple of the books that I found to be the most helpful in some respects. So. So if it sounds like, and a lot of this is just going to be like, this is it. This is what they say. And you'd be like, back that up. And I'm not going to back it up tonight. But if you want the backup, send me an email, and I'll send you the email back. Tonight it's just for the sake of getting the information out. I'll be saying a lot of things just matter-of-factly. And you'll be like, well, where does it say that? Or who says that? So this is not any from me. This is from all different research, different things that are out there. So, yeah, if you want more, you can send me an email. Otherwise, I'm going to try to stick to this. It will probably be at least 45 minutes, and some parts may seem a little slow at first because there's some definitions that may or may not be familiar to us. And it's a different style. I know it's so much information. I don't have it all in me where I can just talk it out, and get it out in a good order. So I have to just stick to my notes. So it'll be like a talk, a read talking reading, whatever that is. So today we're looking and presenting this topic. It's pretty front and center in our society: gender ideology, transgenderism, and gender dysphoria. So obviously probably most of us have seen or know or heard different things, but these topics are on the news and politics, being proposed in different laws, being pushed in the curriculum of many schools. And a lot of the questions that came out, especially last year, were, and really it always is, how do we respond as Catholic Christians? So first, we'll briefly look at kind of some possible ideas of how we got here, answer the questions, what is gender ideology, what is transgenderism, and what is gender dysphoria? And we'll look at how society is currently responding to these things. Then we'll look at actually what does the science actually say? What does science actually tell us currently about the sexes? And thirdly, we'll look at our own Catholic Christian understanding of the body as wonderfully made in God's image. And we'll conclude by focusing on where do we go from here, and hopefully give some practical suggestions for both welcoming and accompanying those who deal with gender dysphoria and transgenderism. So first, from the beginning, just defining the terms. When it comes to gender ideology and transgenderism and gender dysphoria, the first thing we have to recognize is that these three are not the same. So a lot of times in the news even, they'll just get thrown together, categorized as all in the same bucket or something, and that's totally wrong. Gender ideology is not the same as transgenderism, nor the same as gender dysphoria. And those who experience gender dysphoria are not necessarily transgender. So these three are not the same. It's incorrect to assume that someone who, for example, is questioning their biological gender also agrees with gender ideology or is actually transgender. They may just be questioning. But typically when it's thrown out there in the news, they just throw it all together, and a lot of times they'll even interchange these different words as if it's all kind of in the same bucket, but it's not. Very different groups. So gender ideology, in general, is the theory that, this is going to be technical, that the sex binary, male and female, doesn't capture the complexity of the human species, that the human individuals are properly described in terms of an internal sense of gender called gender ideology, and that may be incongruent with their sex that's assigned at birth. In other words, what they feel inside is different than what their body says on the outside. Essentially, this means according to gender ideology, there can be an infinite number of genders. Transgenderism, on the other hand, is someone who claims a gender that is different from their sex assigned at birth. But this does not mean that they agree with gender ideology or that they believe there are more than two genders. Transgenderism is often associated with gender dysphoria, which is when a person experiences a constant, miserable discontentment in their own body. So we'll go into each of these a little more. But first, possibly, where did all of this questioning of gender and identity come from? I believe at least partly it comes from extreme positions in the culture regarding masculinity and femininity. There are two extreme positions in culture regarding masculinity and femininity. First, that gender is just a mere social construct. And second, overly rigid gender stereotypes. When you don't fit into the box of one of these extremes, it causes people to be confused and to question. Another thing to keep in mind is your body is you. So if we disconnect who we are from our bodies, our identity needs to attach to something. And then our identity will end up attaching to the personality. And the challenge there is that there are as many personalities as there are persons. And so that's how you end up with an endless spectrum of gender if our identity is attached to our personality. If we look at the first extreme position, it says gender is just a social construct, meaning masculinity and femininity are not real things. Boys are into this because that's the way we raise them, and girls are into that because that's the way the culture raises them. It's just cultural conditioning. Hasbro, the toy company, they recently wanted to come out with a gender-neutral playhouse. And so they came out with this dollhouse that both boys and girls would supposedly interact with in the same way. It didn't go too well. They found out and they said, quote, "It soon emerged that girls and boys did not interact with the structure in the same way. The girls dressed the dolls, kissed them, and played house. The boys catapulted the toy baby carriage from the roof." The Hasbro manager came up with a novel explanation. He said, quote, "Boys and girls are different." Good job. The second extreme position is kind of an over-rigid gender stereotypes. So for example, if you're a real man, then you're into this. And if you're a real woman, you have to fit into that box. But what if you don't fit into the box? So for example, one idea in America, just one idea, we could probably pick 10 easy. But one idea in America of a real man is that you have to be into drinking beer and shooting deer and watching NASCAR. What if you're a male and you don't fit that, though? What if you don't like NASCAR? What if you don't care about drinking beer or hunting? What if you don't fit the mold? And the truth is that it's okay if I don't fit the mold. I know I am a man, not because I feel so manly. I know I am a man because I have the body of a man. We have to remember our bodies are not meaningless. Our bodies are meaningful. Pope Francis, speaking against some of these stereotypes, says, such rigidity in turn can hinder the development of an individual's abilities, to the point of leading him or her, for example, to think that it's not very masculine to cultivate art or dance, or that it's not very feminine to exercise leadership. So these overly rigid gender stereotypes often can cause questioning. The solution is not to change one's sexual identity, nor to eliminate sexual distinctions. Rather, it is to avoid over-accentuations of them. Here's one quote I left in. Feminist Laura Tanner, she posted a great definition of a woman on Facebook to address this. And she said, a woman is someone with a female body and any personality, not a female personality in any body. I'll read that again because it could get your mind, She said, a woman is someone with a female body and any personality, not a female personality in any body. In other words, the body matters. So in summary, gender stereotypes try to get a person to conform their personality to match their body. Your body is male, so your personality needs to fit that. Gender theory commits the opposite mistake. It tries to get a person to conform their body to fit their personality. But what if neither one really needs to change? Gender dysphoria. Now, what happens if things don't seem to align? What if I feel like my identity doesn't align with the biology of my body? As I mentioned earlier, that is what we call gender dysphoria. To understand dysphoria, first think about euphoria. Euphoria is a blissful, contented, peaceful state. Dysphoria is the opposite, a deep discontent, a feeling of incongruency between my body and my identity. To understand this, maybe think about it like this. What would it be like for one day to dress as the opposite sex? Think about that and soak that in a little bit. What would you do in your day dressed as the opposite sex? You go to church that way, you go to the store that way, you go to school that way, you go to work that way, you go to the gym that way. You would probably feel awkward, disingenuous, a kind of this isn't me feeling. At least you could look forward to the end of the day when you could take those clothes off and feel comfortable again at home in your normal clothing. However, what if the dysphoria wasn't the outfit? What if the dysphoria was the body itself? And that body became this endless source of disappointment, discontentment, and discomfort every time you looked at your body. This is gender dysphoria. Now, more than 80% of the time when a child experiences this, they will naturally come to identify with their biological sex if gender affirmative care does not intervene. So gender affirmative care is the world's answer, the world's response. Gender affirmative care essentially says, if you don't feel like your body lines up with your identity, Your mind is not the problem, your body is the problem. Your body doesn't reveal reality, your feelings reveal reality, so be true to yourself, and we have a 4-step plan. This is right on the website for gender affirmative care. The first step is social transitioning. This is where they tell you that you can change your name, your preferred pronoun, the restroom you use, etc. So the first step is social transitioning, then the next 3 steps are actually medical transitioning. The second step after social transitioning is puberty blockers. So puberty blockers, these are now being given to children as young as 9 years old. However, when you don't go through puberty at the natural time, that is actually a disease called Kalman syndrome. This disease is treated with medicine because we should be naturally going through puberty. To not go through puberty is a disease, not a solution. But gender affirmative care incorrectly tells children that puberty blockers are like a pause button that will give you more time to decide if transitioning is right for you. This is a lie. You cannot pause puberty. This step actually unleashes the floodgates, so to speak, of chemical interventions that don't stop with puberty blockers. Almost 100% of the time, when a child goes on puberty blockers, they will go on to the cross-sex hormones. Cross-sex hormones are the 3rd step of gender affirmative care. So when you put a child on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones, it sterilizes the child for the rest of his or her life. Examples are testosterone blocker for boys or giving testosterone to girls, estrogen supplements, etc. These enhance the secondary sex characteristics. So you do not develop the primary sex characteristics of the genitals. You develop the secondary ones. What does this mean? This means this recreates a redistribution of fat in the man and the woman. It recreates a redistribution of musculature in the woman as she takes testosterone and the voice deepens. These exterior changes begin to take place. But to keep this appearance up, it requires a lifelong medicalization of these drugs. After 5 years of being on testosterone, a woman's uterus will atrophy to the point where she will be required to get a hysterectomy. The promise of gender affirmative care is that as you continue to take these things, you will gradually begin to feel more and more at home in your own body. And if you want, then you can go on further and get surgery. So they'll go on to say things like, if you feel that you are not truly feeling like you are a girl, then perhaps top surgery might be right for you. So surgery is the 4th and final step of this transitioning process. Did you know, as of last year, the research last year when I did this, 2023, in Oakland, California, hospitals are performing top surgeries on children as young as 12 years old. Los Angeles, as young as 13 years old. In Portland, Oregon, you can't get a tattoo until you're 21, and you can't even use the tanning salon until you're 18. However, if you want a radical double mastectomy, you can get that at the age of 15 without parental consent throughout the entire state of Oregon. Now, they promise this will give you relief and that you will finally feel at home in your own body. The reality, this often sets an endless set of false summits. For example, well, now my breasts are gone, but my hips feel too big. Maybe I need to get that fixed, and then this fixed. And one idea claims that you won't be tempted to commit suicide because you'll feel at home in your body. But unfortunately, the data reveals the opposite. Within 10 years of these gender affirmative surgeries, the suicide rate climbs to 19 times higher than the general population. And looking only at the female to male transitioners, their suicide rate is 40 times higher than the general population after about 10 years of gender affirmative care. Gender affirmative care, of course, they claim this is because the culture is so transphobic. It's not welcoming these individuals. However, these statistics are actually from an extremely progressive society in Sweden. So the real issue here is not bigotry. The reality is, when a person takes their own life, 90% of the time they have a diagnosable psychiatric condition. Surgery and hormones are not meant to treat those things. Surgery is not treating a mental illness. It is collaborating with a mental illness. A foundational principle of both medical and mental health practice is first, do no harm. And the corollary is begin with the least invasive treatments first. For example, try physical therapy before spinal surgery. Talk therapy and behavior modification before prescribing psychoactive medication. Diet and exercise before gastric bypass, and so on. The current transgender paradigm is exactly the opposite. Gender affirmative care breaks these most foundational principles of both medical and mental health practice and moves to the radical medical interventions before treating underlying and accompanying issues. This should raise red flags and alarms for all of us. This response is completely unscientific and in fact ignores the actual science of the body and the mind of the human person. Those who suffer from gender dysphoria are not being told the truth about all the options that they have available to them as they work through their questions. They're not being truly supported or accompanied. They are simply being told to change their external appearance until their internal feelings are at peace. And when that solution doesn't work, they are left to deal with the medical consequences for the rest of their life. Mercy and compassion should move us to speak up against these lies and speak hope to the suffering. The truth found in science is not being told to those who identify as trans or those who suffer gender dysphoria. So what does the science actually say about sex? First, sex is a biological trait intrinsically oriented toward reproduction. Males are biologically organized to engage in sexual acts that donate genetic material. Females are organized to engage in sexual acts that receive genetic material and then carry the resulting offspring. These fundamental differences is what allows scientists to distinguish male from female. I want to emphasize here that this does not mean that a man or a woman who cannot procreate is not truly a man or a woman. A person's biological sex reflects reproductive capacity. This is important because of the implications. If man and woman refer to our generative potentiality, changing one's sex is an impossibility because a man cannot physically adopt the procreative role of a female and vice versa. With expanding biological and neurological research and discovery in these recent years, a lot has been written about sexual difference. Though the studies are still ongoing, these findings and conclusions include some very basic facts for us. First, every cell has a sex. Written into our genetic code are sexual differences that manifest themselves at a cellular level. They have currently found more than 6,500 sex-specific genes. For example, your arteries are male or female. Every cell in the human body that has a nucleus is sexed as male or female. Dr. Frank Jarvis, he says that there are ubiquitous sex differences in the molecular makeup of all male and female cells. And this is one reason why a sex change operation is impossible. Every cell of the human body would need to be changed. Sex begins in the womb. So the presence of a Y chromosome determines maleness, and its absence determines femaleness by week 7 of pregnancy. The structure of our bodies is arranged to produce either large sex cells or small sex cells. And these sex cells are called gametes. Large gametes are ova, and small gametes are sperm. This twofold distinction between large and small gametes is stable and universal, not only throughout the human species, but also among all plant and animal species that reproduce sexually. Scientifically speaking, there is no such thing as a third gamete or a spectrum of possible gametes. Therefore, there is no such thing as a gender other than male or female. Some will argue, well, what about intersex people? But the word intersex is often a misnomer that people use to say someone is not male or female, but something else. But scientifically, this is incorrect. The correct usage of the word intersex is used when referring to a biologically based variation within male or femaleness. These instances of sexual ambiguity within male or femaleness are 1 in every 10,000 births. And this is pretty remarkable given the fact that sexual development is a process, and at each stage of the process, things can go wrong. We should actually be surprised at how rare cases of genuine sexual ambiguity are, because statistically speaking, sex is readily recognizable at birth for 99.98% of human beings. There is a difference, even at the molecular level. Let's see, I might skip a couple things for time's sake. All right, let's do this one. Sex affects health. Recognizing differences between the sexes is regarded as vitally important for good medical practice, because scientists have found that male and female bodies tend to be susceptible to certain diseases in differing ways, to differing degrees, and they respond to treatments differently. So, for example, men and women exhibit symptoms of heart attack completely different. Men are more prone to infectious diseases than women are. Women are more prone to autoimmune diseases. Men take longer to recover their speech after a stroke than women, because women use both hemispheres of their brain for communication. Men and women may respond to drugs differently. There are actually medical doctors today who specialize now in gender medicine, not for transgender purposes, but because as men and women, we are biologically different and respond to medicines differently. The brain is actually a sexed organ. After the reproductive organs, the brain is possibly the most sexed organ in the human being. The neuroscience literature shows that the human brain is a sex-typed organ with distinct anatomical differences in neural structures and accompanying physiological differences in function. So not that there are male or female brains, but on the average there are differences in the brains of males and females that tend to make a difference in how men and women experience emotion and pain, how they see and hear, and how they remember and navigate. Here are just a few more conclusions from science. There is no scientific evidence that a transgender identity is biologically determined. Nancy Siegel, a psychologist and geneticist, researched cases of studies on identical twins where one person in each set identified as transgender. And she found there was no evidence for a biological causal hypothesis. The consensus of the scientific evidence overwhelmingly supports the proposition that a physically and developmentally normal boy or girl is indeed what he or she appears to be at birth. There is no scientific basis for believing that playing with toys typical of boys defines a child as a boy, or that playing with toys typical of girls defines a child as a girl. Plastic surgery on the reproductive organs, no matter how realistic the results may appear, does not create the organs of the opposite sex. These add-ons do not change a person's biological sex. The result is not integrated into the organism as organized for reproduction, and it cannot fulfill the purpose that is central to the organ's definition. People who identify as transgender are more likely to suffer from conditions that often lead to suicide, depression, anxiety disorders, and substance abuse. These problems do not seem to be alleviated by sex reassignment procedures. While these measures may bring temporary satisfaction, they do not tend to promote long-term mental health. After learning all that science has affirmed so far about the wonders of the human person to be male or female, even down to the cellular level, we can truly join the psalmist who praises God at the wonder of his being, and when he says, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." So now that we've seen what society generally says and what science proves, I want to transition us to some of the teachings of the Catholic Church on the human person and the human body made male or female in the image and likeness of God. We will see that this Catholic Christian view aligns well with the scientific view. This is another proof that faith and science are not opposed, but actually affirm one another. So we begin at the beginning, in the book of Genesis. Actually, the Archbishop Alexander Sample of Portland, Oregon, has a great pastoral letter where he references extensively the Catechism of the Catholic Church and Scriptures, and he takes us to the beginning of Genesis here. And he reminds us of the original purpose for which humans were created. He quotes and he says, "The first chapters of Genesis and sacred Scripture provide the foundation for a Catholic anthropology, the Catholic understanding of the human person. According to our faith, human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. We are set apart from the rest of creation because we are uniquely called to share by knowledge and love in God's own life. This is our ultimate purpose and our supreme vocation, sharing in God's own life." Genesis also speaks of our uniqueness in creation as creatures with a body and a soul, with spirit, with matter. Our bodies are part of God's plan and purpose from the beginning. They are not an afterthought, a side note, and certainly not a mistake. With bodies comes sexual difference. This too is good and blessed by God. One aspect of our embodied existence is sexual difference, maleness and femaleness. Because of the profound unity of the body and soul, one's nature as a man or a woman is rooted in sexed embodiment. Being man or being woman is a reality which is good and willed by God. Man and woman possess an inalienable dignity which comes to them immediately from God, their Creator. Man and woman are both with one and the same dignity in the image of God. In their being man and being woman, they reflect the Creator's wisdom and goodness. Sexual difference has profound significance for our earthly life. It is only through the union of male and female that human beings come into existence. Yet, sexual difference also carries profound and spiritual meaning. Maleness and femaleness signal our capacity for interpersonal communion that is life-giving. This reflects or images God's Trinitarian nature, because God himself is an interpersonal communion and the generative font of all life. Sexual difference is therefore one way that God reveals himself to us and through us. Besides the body revealing our sexual, let's see, I might want to skip that part again. Okay. Besides the body revealing our sexual differences reveal one way that God himself reveals himself to us and through us. The physical body reveals something of the invisible human spirit. So for a holistic and personalist approach, we must always view the person as an integrated unity of spirit, body, and soul. Our bodies are therefore not empty shells without meaning, where the parts can be swapped in and out like a Mr. Potato Head doll. Our bodies are not just bodies. Bodies are persons made manifest. We can remember the sacramentality of our body in connection with the sacramentality of the body of Christ in the Incarnation. So there's a sacramental principle in the Catholic Church teaching that's always at work. The visible reveals the invisible. So the body reveals to us the eternal and divine reality of the person, a reality that can only break into the tangible, sensible world through embodiment. This is how God enters into our world and reveals himself, through the incarnational reality of Christ, who became a body that we might know and love the invisible God. Just as Jesus' personhood is revealed in his Eucharistic body, so too our bodies are a revelation, a sacramental image of the living God and a temple of his indwelling Spirit. Accepting our bodies as gifts from God is true purity. Pope Francis says that learning to accept our bodies is essential for learning to respect the earth and all of creation. We cannot say, save the earth, without also saying, save our bodies. Pope Francis states, the acceptance of our body is a gift from God, and it's vital for welcoming and accepting the entire world as a gift from the Father and as our common home. Whereas thinking that we enjoy absolute power over our own bodies turns often subtly into thinking that we enjoy an absolute power over all creation. Learning to accept our body, to care for it, and to respect its fullest meaning is an essential element of any genuine human ecology. In the light of the Catholic faith, the human body is first and foremost always a gift. It is a good and willed by God. Our bodies are part of the harmony of the created order, and therefore our sexual difference is part of God's self-revelation, as well as a sign of our ultimate calling to give and receive love. This giving and receiving love is the primary way we are to live as images of God's love on earth, and is what Pope St. John Paul II called the spousal attribute of the human body with its sex, its masculinity and femininity. This spousal attribute is the power to express love, precisely that love in which the human person becomes a gift, and through this gift fulfills the very meaning of his or her being and existence. The body is real and it is beautiful. Stamped into our body as a man or as a woman is not only your identity, but also your calling, your mission. The Church sees the way our bodies are organized biologically as a representation for our callings to be mothers and fathers. Masculinity and femininity is something we live through jobs, sports, family, etc. Our bodies tell us something about our mission, our calling, and about our God, whose image we were made in. Because of the uniqueness of womanhood, Eric Gray said, quote, "Whatever you give a woman," you might have heard this already, "whatever you give a woman, she will make it greater. If you give her sperm, she will give you a baby. If you give her a house, she will give you a home. If you give her groceries, she'll give you a meal. If you give her a smile, she will give you her heart. She multiplies and enlarges what is given to her. Upon reading this, some might feel offended that such a quote relegates all women to domestic life, but the unique gifts of womanhood do not determine a woman's destiny or require her to become a biological mother to lead to a fulfilling life. Rather, they indicate that she has been entrusted with a unique capacity to nurture others. In the words of Saint Edith Stein, a woman's soul is designed to be a shelter in which other souls may unfold. Both spiritual companionship and spiritual motherliness are not limited to the physical spouse and mother relationships, but they extend to all people with whom woman comes into contact. Or as Mother Teresa remarked, God's most precious gift to women is the ability to love as a woman. Perhaps this is why the devil is so desperate to convince women that they need to become masculinized in order to become powerful. Our fourth section on accompaniment and with whole person affirmation. How are we to respond when we encounter someone who identifies as non-binary, trans, or is suffering with gender dysphoria? The world's response is two extremes. The world says if someone identifies as non-binary, then you should affirm them, and if you don't affirm them, then you are rejecting them. So, are you going to be transphobic, or are you going to be open-minded and loving? Well, the church rejects these responses and offers a third called accompaniment and whole person affirmation. Whole person affirmation means a complete body, mind, spirit approach. So rather than restricting affirmation to a subjective sense of gender identity. Again, I liked Archbishop Sample's explanation of this. He said, whole person affirmation begins by first affirming the belovedness of every person. The first and most important truth that each young person needs to hear is this: you are infinitely loved. You are a living, breathing icon of God. And in this very moment, God is willing your existence because he delights in you. Whole person affirmation also affirms the goodness and sacramentality of the body. Our body reveals our personhood. This is not something we need to force the body to do. The body is always revealing our personhood. He goes on to express that a positive view of the body must also recognize the burdens of having a body. The limits and vulnerabilities of our bodies remind all of us of our dependence upon God and our need for healing. We all experience a sense of disintegration, inner tensions between our reason and our will and our desires. And sometimes we can experience our human condition as a living contradiction. Nevertheless, the Christian revelation shows us that the resolution to this often painful dilemma cannot be achieved through externalizing, projecting, or acting out those antinomies and disharmonies, but rather through arduous inner work and reliance on the grace of God. We have all seen or even experienced ourselves people who are suffering and in pain. They turn to drugs, alcohol, or other disordered bodily pleasures, attempting to numb the pain or to escape. Some people can also experience deep disharmony with their bodies or a sense of incongruence with their sex. The experience of sex incongruence or dysphoria is not itself sinful, just as concupiscence itself is not a sin. Those who experience gender dysphoria should not be judged, rejected, or ignored. but met with compassion. Whole person affirmation also affirms the uniqueness of the individual. Every human person is a masterpiece of the Creator. Whole person affirmation also affirms the need for accompaniment. Accompaniment is a commitment to walk alongside someone. It's an ongoing process of being with. This can be difficult because in our world today, people want a quick fix, and they have a very difficult time putting in work and going through a process in order to slowly yet steadily attain the healing they desire. Accompaniment can also be challenging because we might feel uncomfortable with the conversations, uncomfortable with the questioning or the lack of clarity. Sometimes Christians can simply be lazy, and they want someone else to do it. Go talk to the priest. Catholics are very well known for simply saying that. Go talk to the priest. You should probably go talk to the priest. I always say you should just go talk to Peggy. However, every Catholic must be willing to accompany. Individuals wrestling with questions about their identity deserve respect and compassion. If the only people who offer them a listening ear are those who will accompany them into a gender clinic to obtain cross-sex hormones, then why would they look elsewhere for support? Imagine if you met someone and fell in love, but their first language was not your own. Odds are, as an expression of love and out of a desire to establish a deeper connection, you would make an effort to learn their language. It shows that they matter to you and that you wish to connect with them in the way that is most familiar to them. In the same respect, if Christians hope to engage in meaningful dialogue with individuals who identify as trans or who are experiencing gender dysphoria, it is essential for them to understand the basic concepts. I would add it's essential for us to be willing to take the journey with the person. If we don't, those who believe in gender affirmative care will fill the void. And instead of experiencing a healing compassion of Jesus through his body, the church, the person will end up suffering more. Pope Francis's view of accompaniment, he says, to accompany is to say with both word and action, I will be with you in this process of discernment and discovery, which may involve disagreement, because I care about your ultimate good. He also says accompaniment is like a pilgrimage. It's a journey with Christ to the Father. It's not a sort of therapy supporting someone's self-absorption. Accompaniment is characterized by the art of listening that is respectful and compassionate. Accompaniment requires great patience and docility to the Holy Spirit, as well as humility and an awareness of our own limits, and a reverence for the ultimate mystery within each person that only God can fully know. Jesus gives us an example of this when he accompanies the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. He first walks with them and listens. He asks questions, he listens again, and then he teaches the full meaning of the scriptures to them, revealing God's plan for the Messiah and their lives. The first step is listening with a reverent curiosity. Practically speaking, this means ask the person to share their story with you. Tell me more. When did you start feeling like this? Thank you for sharing this. That must have been hard or scary to tell me this. Tell me more. This practical first step to the art of listening could also be to read and listen to the many detransitioner stories that are out there now. There's over 40,000 people who identify now as detrans on Reddit. They are screaming from the rooftops. I did that. I had the surgeries. It was not the answer to the problem. It actually created more problems. So detransitioners are speaking out, and they say gender affirmative care, social and medical transitioning, is not the only option. It is not the only form of care. We can read and watch people's stories who have detransitioned. From their stories, we learn that some children are given the message that they would be more valued if they adopted their gender identity of the opposite sex. Rejected or abused children may act on the belief that they would be better treated if they were the other sex. Gender identity problems can also be triggered by the death, extended absence, or the depression of a maternal figure. There are now dozens of online sites with personal accounts of those who regret their transitions, as well as sites devoted to reversal surgeries. One of the earliest and most well-known detransitioners is Walt Heyer, who has authored a number of books and articles on the transgender phenomena. After undergoing the surgeries in his 40s, Walt states that living as a woman brought him no lasting peace, and his gender confusion only seemed to get worse. Walt detransitioned in his 50s after recognizing that early trauma caused him to seek healing by becoming another sex, rather than in mental health treatment, which no one ever suggested to him. Now, in his 70s, he says it all started when he was a young boy and his grandmother would dress him up as a girl. Another example that's well known out there is Kari Stella. Kari Stella was put on testosterone after only 3 or 4 visits with a therapist in Portland, Oregon. The therapist emphasizes the lack of Kari emphasizes the lack of effort to get to the root of her discomfort with herself and the absence of any suggestion of alternative therapies. She shares, quote, "There was no meaningful attempt made to process the issues that I brought up and that led in part to my wish to transition. When I was transitioning, no one in the medical or psychological field ever tried to dissuade me, to offer other options, to do really anything to stop me besides tell me I should wait until I was 18. I want to ask you, how many other medical conditions are there where you can walk into the doctor's office, tell them you have a certain condition which has no objective test, which can be caused by trauma or mental health issues or societal factors, and receive life-altering medications on your say-so?" Chloe Cole, she's another recent detransitioner, now at the age 18, maybe 19 now this year, very vocal. And she has spoken on many shows and interviews, one by Dr. Jordan Peterson on YouTube. She shows sharing her experience. She began experiencing some gender dysphoria at the age of 12 and started seeing a therapist. Her therapist gave her the diagnosis, and she began the path of medical transition at 13 years old with puberty blockers and testosterone. Next, she had a double mastectomy at 15 years old. She realized this was not the best decision for herself and stopped transitioning at the age of 16. And she is now a strong advocate against gender ideology and seeking legal retribution against the doctors for acting without her ability to have and to give a true informed consent to the treatment. All of these detransition stories are heartbreaking. As you hear firsthand the negative experiences and consequences due to a supposed gender-affirming care, there is no true care or accompaniment of the human person in this process. They simply continue to refer them to further treatment, which becomes more and more invasive and less fulfilling the deeper the person goes. This is why it is so important for us to be willing to walk with people experiencing gender dysphoria without prejudging and giving them fuller scientific information, God's design for them, and even to connect with them, with other detransitioners so they can hear their stories for themselves and better inform their decisions and their journey. The second part of accompanying means a joyful witness to our Catholic faith, so that they see in our lives, our actions, and our words that God is love, and that he sent his only Son, his only begotten Son, to bring us into a communion of love. Accompaniment requires us to love and to accept all people in a way that invites each person to a deeper relationship with Christ and a greater alignment of their lives with his teachings. Persons who identify as transgendered are created by God, loved by God, and we as faithful Christians are called to love each of them as our neighbor. To love others means, at its heart, to will and desire their good. After listening with love, share God's love with them. Share how God loves you and them, and how you experience God's love. Pray with them. Help them experience God's loving presence in that very moment. We are all created for love and longing to be loved. We will do whatever it takes to be loved. Everyone's story is unique. Therefore, the only way to fully understand individuals who identify as trans is to become a part of their lives and care enough to learn about them as persons. If we as disciples of Jesus Christ don't show them this patient listening and loving accompaniment, who will? Gender-affirming care, by contrast, is neither patient nor inquisitive, but quick to impose a one-size-fits-all framework that obscures comorbid conditions, complex circumstances, and the developmental process of adolescent identity formation. Any therapeutic approach that does not address the whole person, spirit, soul, and body, cannot lead to a human flourishing and conflicts with the Catholic faith. I hope this talk has been helpful and informative. My goal is to present this material in such a way that always keeps in mind the individual person. Some of us know people who identify as trans or who are suffering with gender dysphoria. My hope was that this talk would give you information, talking points, but most importantly, a practical plan to be at peace while you respond with love, compassion, accompaniment, and whole person care and affirmation. Perhaps if there's time, it could be good to have a little quiet time to just ask the Lord yourself, what is one practical step for me, Lord, to take towards this whole person care and affirmation? Or how can I even just reflect the Catholic faith in a more joyful way so they'll be drawn by God's goodness to seek him, especially to seek him for answers in their discontentment. We'll give you maybe 2 minutes of quiet, and then Peggy will come back up maybe.